My sister calls me greedy for charging her rent after she brought men to my apartment and contributed nothing, but I changed the locks and left her without a place to sleep. I, 27 female, allowed my sister Jen, 34 female, to live with me when she was going through a bitter divorce. Now it's been 7 months since she's been living with me. Jen was married to a wealthy man for almost a decade, after which he cheated on her, and she left him. She impulsively left their home out of anger but didn't know where to go. She was a stay-at-home wife, and her husband was quite well off. They didn't have any kids, and she led a luxurious life. She was used to an easy life, and when she was suddenly thrust into a harsh reality, she didn't know what to do. The friends she had were mostly the wives of her husband's friends, so she couldn't seek refuge at their houses. She was supposed to receive alimony, but the divorce proceedings were still ongoing, so she needed a roof over her head until then. Our parents live in the countryside, far from the city, and she didn't want to go there. So she turned to me, hoping I would be her savior. Despite living in the same city for so many years, Jen never visited me. She was so busy with her carefree life that she never bothered to check how I was doing, except for the occasional messages and calls. I didn't need her help either, as I was managing things on my own. Jen and I shared a decent bond while growing up. We have a 7-year age difference, so when she started her adult life, I was a teenager living mine. Soon, she moved to the city to live with her boyfriend. She was pursuing a modeling career at the time and had a couple of other relationships before meeting her ex-husband and getting married. She didn't have great success, just some gigs here and there, and she gave up her modeling career after getting engaged to her ex-husband. I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment and barely make ends meet. I had a modest job that only covered my rent and utilities. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of having a roommate, let alone my sister, who had a reputation for being demanding and irresponsible. I told her I didn't have a fancy place like her 4-bedroom house, but she assured me she would sleep on the couch while I could have my bedroom. She said she was at the lowest point in her life, and all she needed was the basics, a roof over her head. I still had my doubts, but she convinced me by saying that the betrayal had made her more resilient and that she now wanted to take control of her life and get a job. I reluctantly agreed to let her stay with me until she could get back on her feet. It's been 7 months since then, and she's still struggling to regain her independence. Looking back, I realize I was naive to think it would be a temporary arrangement. Jen moved in with all her emotional, financial, and literal baggage. My life has never been the same. The first few weeks were tough. She cried day and night. She often locked herself in the room, crying and yelling at her ex-husband over the phone. I tried to be understanding and gave her the space I thought she needed for privacy and coping. She was going through a hard time. There were many nights when I slept on the couch and let her have my bed. Her divorce was ongoing, so she had to attend meetings with lawyers or appear before a magistrate. This was frequent during the first 2 or 3 months, and after that, she hardly went out. She spent most of her days lounging in the apartment, watching TV and browsing her phone. She wasn't doing much in terms of job hunting, but she assured me she was just taking a break and would soon start looking for work. Weeks turned into months, and my patience began to wear thin. Jen had been living with me for over 7 months, and not once did she contribute to the rent or utilities. At first, I didn't mind covering the expenses, thinking she just needed time to accept reality. Getting out of a decade-long marriage is not easy. I was understanding of her because her life had been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. But then, last week, I lost my job. It was a bitter blow. The company I worked for went bankrupt. I came home and broke down in front of Jen. That job meant everything to me. I cried, telling her how I was going to manage expenses. I thought my unemployment would motivate her to act, but I guess she has taken it for granted. Though she told me not to worry, and that she would find a job and contribute, I doubt her words are sincere. I don't see her moving to look for work now. My concern is that I don't think I can cover rent and bills with unemployment benefits, and the stress of keeping a roof over our heads is becoming unbearable. I told her to get her act together, but every time I bring up the topic of rent, she deflects the conversation saying, "I'm looking for a job," or "I'll start paying you once I get my alimony." But nothing materializes. No job, no effort, no rent. Every time I get angry about this, she starts crying about her miserable life. She tells me that once her divorce is settled, she'll pay me every penny I've spent on her. I don't hold on to her words because I know she has her own issues to sort out. I don't want her money either. I just want to get rid of her. I'm afraid of using my savings to support her. The prospect of finding a new job with a similar salary in the current market is daunting. To be honest, I've started to resent Jen's presence in my home. She seems completely oblivious to my struggles. Yes, she helps with the household chores, but it's not enough. I want her to stand on her own 2 feet, but I also can't throw her out knowing she has nowhere to go. Update 1. Thanks for the comments. Sorry for the delay in updating. I've been busy handling 2 jobs. Yes, I got 2 part-time jobs and I'm making some money from them. The situation with my sister got worse when I was unemployed for a couple of weeks. I saw her struggling to find a job for herself. She got a job as a receptionist, did it for a month, and when I got the 2 part-time jobs, she quit hers. She thought I could take care of both of us since my combined salary from both jobs is equivalent to my last full-time job, but I have to work 12 hours a day. I asked her what happened with her job. She said she asked for leave to attend court hearings and that's why they fired her. I clearly told her she needed to find a job or some other means to pay for rent and utilities. She didn't like it, but she found another job and said she would pay her bills. She started bringing her own food and didn't touch mine, but there was no contribution towards utilities or rent. When I asked her, she said her salary is very low and she's spending most of it on food and other expenses. She said she's looking for a better paying job and would then pay the rent. I frowned, and she said she would pay all the overdue bills for all the months together once she gets a better job or the alimony. I want her to move out, but she can't even afford the minimum rent. How the hell could she rent a place on her own? Another 2 months passed and nothing changed. Jen still couldn't pay the rent, was still wandering around my apartment, and didn't pay a cent towards utilities. In her defense, she said, "What extra do you have to pay for me? I bring my own food. You still have to pay the rent and utilities even if I'm not here. So how the hell am I a burden to you? In fact, I'm helping you. I contribute to the household chores. You never thank me for that." I usually don't get involved in conversations with her, but I had reached my breaking point and responded, "Let me give you a reality check. In case you didn't realize, your 12 uninterrupted hours of watching TV and keeping the lights on significantly increased the electricity bill. Also, if you weren't here, I would have gotten a roommate who would actually pay me in real money and not in empty promises." She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Who would agree to live in this dirty apartment and also on the living room couch?" I was stunned by her words. My apartment isn't the best in the city, but it's definitely not dirty. Even if it were, it's the same place that provided you shelter when you had nowhere else to go. She quickly retracted and said, "Sorry, I haven't lived in this kind of place, so it's hard for me to believe that people rent out their living room too. Don't worry, I'll pay you all the bills once my divorce is settled. I'm noting down all the money I owe you so far." I wanted to ask her how much she owed me according to her calculations, but I didn't want to get tangled up in talking to her. After the conversation, the tension between us became evident. Every conversation we had seemed to end in an argument. I'll be honest, most of the time, it was me who got upset with her and argued because she wasn't willing to take responsibility. To make things worse, I discovered she was bringing guys over when I wasn't home. One day I came home early and found strange men lounging on my couch. I asked her about it, and she said it was a friend from work who had accompanied her, and she had invited him over for coffee. A week later, I found a guy coming out of my bathroom. I felt like my space had been violated. It was clear she was bringing men into my apartment in my absence. I confronted her about it, but she brushed it off, saying she needed distractions to cope with the stress of the divorce. I said she could have all the distractions she wanted, but not in my apartment. God knows what kind of infections those men brought with them. I wanted to be compassionate, but it was hard to feel sympathy for someone who was taking advantage of my generosity. I knew that if I didn't take drastic measures soon, I would end up in serious financial trouble. That's when I knew I had to be firm. I sat Jenny down and told her that my finances were tight and I would need a roommate. So if she really wanted to stay with me, she had to start paying rent or she would have to leave. I wasn't asking for much, just enough to cover her share of the rent and utilities, but Jen didn't accept it. She thought that by bringing her own food, she had already done her part. She called me greedy and selfish, accusing me of only caring about money and not about family. She said I was being cruel to her in her time of need and that I was a terrible sister. I was stunned. After everything I had done for her, how could she call me greedy? She knew my situation, that I had lost my job and was working 12 hours to make ends meet, and yet she acted this way. I responded by calling her a freeloader. She stormed out of the house, furious. Then she did the worst thing. Instead of reflecting on her behavior, she bad-mouthed me to our parents, who lived in another city and didn't know what was going on. The next day, I got a call from my mom. She was upset, saying that Jen had told her I was trying to kick her out on the street. She said, "How can you be so insensitive, especially when Jen is going through such a hard time?" I tried to explain my side, but it was clear my parents had already made up their minds. They sided with Jen, telling me I needed to support her no matter what. I asked if they were willing to help by sending money to cover Jen's share of the rent. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my dad spoke, saying, "This is one of those rare moments where you have to act like a responsible person and help your sister." I was furious at their demand. It's easy to say that when they aren't the ones footing the bill. I felt betrayed by my own family, who seemed to care more about Jen's well-being than mine. I was miserable, working 72 hours a week and earning $4.40 per hour. I wanted to quit one of the jobs and focus on finding a full-time job with good pay, but I can't quit in this situation. I need both jobs to get by. It's become mentally and physically exhausting for me. After that call, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own stability for Jen's sake, especially when she wasn't making any effort to improve her situation. I gave her a final ultimatum. Either she starts paying rent and utilities, or she has to leave. I told her she had 2 weeks to pay or make other housing arrangements. Jen was furious. She accused me of being insensitive and greedy, but I stood my ground. I couldn't afford to let her stay any longer without contributing. The final straw was when she threw a tantrum, telling me she didn't need my charity and that she'd find a place to live on her own. I said, "Fine, we'll see." 2 weeks went by, and Jen still hadn't paid rent or made plans to move out. So, I did the only thing I could do. I packed her things, left them by the door, and changed the locks while she was out. When she came back that night and found herself locked out, she called me in a panic, begging me to let her in. But I had already made up my mind. I told her she needed to find another place to stay and hung up the phone. I watched from my window as she left the apartment in desperation. I feel bad for her, but what else could I do? My parents also called me, but I ignored them. I couldn't keep supporting Jen anymore. If she doesn't want to improve her life, there's nothing I can do about it. Update 2. The following days were tough. Jen called me several times, leaving messages of apologies and pleas to let her back in. She tried to manipulate me, saying she was going through a hard time and that I was being cruel for abandoning her when she needed me most. She even tried to guilt-trip me by saying our parents were disappointed in me for turning my back on the family, but I didn't give in. My parents also tried every means to convince me to take her back, but I stood firm. They eventually offered to pay Jen's share of the rent, but by then, I had already listed my living room for rent and had found a roommate willing to move in immediately. I couldn't afford to pass up that opportunity. I knew that if I let Jen back in, I would be back in the same situation, struggling to make ends meet and dealing with her excuses and those of my parents. My parents didn't understand my perspective on why I didn't want to live with Jen again. They even threatened to cut off communication if I didn't take her back. I told them, "Oh, go ahead, of course. I'm not taking her back under any circumstances." They cut off all contact with me. I didn't care at all. Later, I heard from mutual friends that she was couch surfing at acquaintances' places, trying to find a more permanent housing solution. I felt a little remorse knowing she was homeless, but I also felt relieved. For the first time in months, I had my space back, and it felt good not to have to deal with the constant stress of supporting someone who didn't appreciate it. I quit one of my part-time jobs and looked for a better job, and within a month, I found one. However, recently, my mom called me out of the blue and apologized for pressuring me so much to help Jen. I asked her what made them change their minds. Then I learned the whole truth behind Jen's divorce. It wasn't her husband who was cheating on her, she was actually seeing other men. Her husband caught her cheating with a colleague, and when he confronted her, she showed no remorse. She didn't want to work, and he was okay with providing for her. But after discovering her infidelity, he had had enough. He filed for divorce and made sure she walked away with nothing. No alimony, no financial support, nothing. He wanted to teach her a lesson, and it seemed life was doing the same. I asked my mom how she found out about all this. She said that Jen's husband revealed the truth. Initially, my parents were reluctant to believe it, but then he sent the evidence, which was hard to deny. I asked why. Suddenly, after so many months, Jen's husband came forward to expose her. My mom said, "After you kicked Jen out of your apartment, she was calling us, complaining about her miserable life. She wanted us to sell our farm and give her the money to rent a condo and start a business. You know how your dad is? He refused to sell the farm and told her to get alimony from her husband. He cheated on her, so he should pay the compensation. But she said her lawyer was a weak guy and couldn't get her the alimony. Your dad got angry and asked her to send the case file, and he would review it with another lawyer. She said she had no documents, as her husband had destroyed everything. It seemed unbelievable, but your dad called Jen's husband to confront him. We were shocked. He revealed the whole truth about Jen. He sent all the screenshots of the chats recovered from Jen's phone, and it was outrageous. Your dad and I apologized to him. Since then, your dad has cut off contact with her and told her never to come home again. I know the obvious question here would be, how come my family and I didn't know the real reason for the divorce? In reality, Jen and her husband barely kept in touch with us. He never visited my parents. Jen never introduced him. Even the wedding invitation was just a formality. My parents attended as guests, but I didn't go. I had another commitment at the time. She only visited my parents 3 or 4 times in the 10 years of her marriage, and according to her previous accounts, her husband was a kind and generous man who provided her with a good life and let her live as she wanted. So finally, the truth about Jen came out, and my parents saw her true colors. When I learned the details, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Jen had always been reckless and selfish, and now she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. She had made a big mistake. Her husband had every right to cut her off, and I realized that by kicking her out of my apartment, I had done the right thing too. Otherwise, I would never have received her share of the rent because she would never have gotten a pension. It wasn't easy to face her, especially when our parents pressured me to take care of her, but I knew I couldn't let her drag me down with her. I had to prioritize my own well-being, even if that meant being labeled as a bad sister. Update 3. Several months have passed since the last time I shared what was happening. Fortunately, things have improved a lot for me. Thanks to my hard work and dedication in my new job, I was promoted, which allowed me to move to a new apartment. This one is much better than the previous one, and the best part is that now I don't have to share it with anyone. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have complete control over my life and my space, and the peace of mind that has given me is priceless. Although my last roommate was quite good, at least compared to my sister. As for Jen, her situation hasn't changed much. Recently, she contacted our parents again, this time asking them to co-sign a loan for her to start a business. She was looking for a quick way to get back to a comfortable life, but she didn't seem to understand that running a business requires more than just a desire for money. My father, who has always been straightforward, told her he wasn't going to do that. He reminded her that she had never worked a day in her life and had no idea what it was like to run a business, which was doomed to fail from the start. Instead of just rejecting her, my father offered something more sensible, that she move to the farm and start working there, feeding the animals and doing other daily tasks. He explained that this would help her learn the value of work and responsibility, and that in a few years, if she proved capable, they could consider the idea of a loan for a business. But, as expected, Jen flatly refused. She said that kind of work seemed too dirty to her and that it wasn't what she had in mind for her future. After that conversation, Jen called me. Although at first I had no intention of answering, I decided to do so out of curiosity. I was surprised to hear her apologize, but I quickly realized that her apology wasn't sincere. Instead, she tried to convince me to talk to our parents to reconsider the loan. She even tried to use our newly re-established relationship as some sort of guarantee, saying that we could work together in the business and share the profits. I stood firm and told her no. I explained that I now have my life in order and wasn't willing to risk my stability for something so uncertain. After that, she tried to move in with me again. Now I have an extra room, which I use as an office and to sit and read, which I guess she knows through our parents. She said, "Now you have more space and a better job, maybe you can let me stay for a few weeks until I can improve my life a little." I knew those weeks would turn into months, and if I wasn't careful, maybe years. So I said no. She didn't take my response well, and as expected, she got angry. She said I had always been the cruel and selfish sister, and that I shouldn't be surprised if she decided to cut all ties with me. Finally, I hung up and didn't listen to the rest of what she had to say. I've also blocked her number, even though it wasn't her old number because that one was already blocked before. Anyway, during the conversation, before I lost my patience and she started yelling at me, she had told me that she had been living with a friend, but I don't know who it was, and that she was figuring out how to start her business. I was happy for her because now she's someone else's problem, not mine. But that's all I can tell you about my life and my sister at the moment.